Can't get enough of that intro. Hey, we are live, pal. I'm Double G here, of course, with one Andrew Zarian. Andrew, how is your day going so far?
Hectic. Very hectic today as the motorcycle brooms right by as we're recording this. Did you guys hear that? It was the loudest thing. My whole house shook.
So we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Love your t-shirt. We are going
Oh,
to
thank
talk
you, thank you.
about Scott Hall. We're also going to talk about no Cody. He didn't show up on Raw. Seems like they're still teasing him. We'll talk about what's going on there. Talk a little bit about AEW storylines post-Revolution, and then, open it up. We weren't able to do this last week, but open it up to any questions or comments, last 10 minutes of this show or so. So firstly, I think we should start with Scott Hall. Of course, deepest regards to friends and family of Scott's. I know it's been a really hard last few days. And this is not just for wrestling fans who did love him, but, obviously there are those who are close to him. And Andrew, I wanted to ask you first, what is your first memory of Scott Hall?
The promos for his debut, those vignettes.
You're talking about
Saturday
the Razor
mornings.
character.
Yeah, the Razor character. Because I'm a couple years younger than you, right? So,
Yes.
What year did he debut? 92, right?
Yes, I believe it was 92.
I would have been 8 when he debuted.
There you
So for me, that was peak wrestling. 91 to 92 was when I just got into it, and I was super into wrestling. That's like a kid, you're into the figures, you're into all of that. So I always say that Hogan brought me into wrestling, seeing Hogan and Warrior, that generation. But in reality, I those couple of years I stuck through the worst of the new generation. But to me, Razor Ramon was the coolest freaking thing you've ever seen. When he comes out with the video package, he doesn't look like anybody else. He has the accent going. He's throwing the toothpick. He was one of my favorites, and definitely, even when he was a heel as a kid, I was so into the character.
So I'm glad you said Razor, because I thought that would be your introduction to him, would be the Razor Ramon character. So I'm going to go back a little.
But let me just say this. I have memory now. I'm you know what? I remember my grandmother watching WCW and seeing the character, but nothing. I knew nothing about him.
Yes. Okay. It's great because, like you said, I'm a little bit older than you, so I got to see, an early version of what he was doing as Razor Ramon in the Diamond Stud. But let's even go back a little bit further. So I don't know, I'm probably 10 years old or so. And, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the After Mags, those are a giant deal when it comes to finding out more information about wrestlers that you don't get to necessarily see on TV all the time. So if you're watching WWF, you know all the characters. If you're watching NWA, you know most of the characters. But, Pro Wrestling Illustrated for me as a kid just opens up this giant universe of wrestling. Oh, of course there would be wrestling in all of these different areas of not only the US, but of the world. And so one of the people I very clearly remember in Pro Wrestling Illustrated is a giant 6'5" jacked up dude with a thick mustache by the name
Very thick
of Big Scott Hall. So that was my introduction to him. And even prior to that, when I would go back and try to find older copies of the wrestling magazines, he was Magnum Scott Hall. I was like, oh, Magnum Scott Hall, Magnum TA, Magnum PI. This is the 80s. They're trying to do things with pop culture going back there. So Big Scott Hall was always mentioned about as sort of the next big thing, right? He's the next big wrestler, but there was always something holding him back. So this is probably 86, 87, I'm guessing.
Oh, wow. That far. So AWA Scott Hall was the first intro.
That was,
so
and I never got to see him on TV. I'd only been able to see him through wrestling magazines.
So I grew up in the generation that when the internet boomed, right? You're talking mid-90s. The first time I ever saw that Scott Hall was with, the curly hair, the big mustache. He's huge, right?
Yeah.
Huge. And I remember seeing this man looks nothing like Razor Ramon. I remember seeing that. It was a tiny little image on my computer. Like I got it, I found it on like the bulletin boards, and I was so impressed by like I can't believe that's even the same guy because he had slimmed down as a Razor character, peak next generation, new generation Scott Hall.
Yeah.
But I have another question for you. Those
Uh-huh.
magazines, like the sport, like the Pro Wrestling Illustrated and all the the aftermags. What was your first memory of seeing one? Because growing up in New York, I really only knew WWF, right? Like there was no I can't think of like getting Crockett. Like I was too young for that. And I had like some memory of WCW, but nothing really. What was your first memory of seeing the magazines? Because for me, it was driving through West Virginia, stopping at a gas station, a rest stop, and seeing a picture of like Flair just covered in blood. Like that was it.
So
Or the Road Warriors, just
yeah,
soaking in blood.
no, there were wrestlers who were always on the covers because they sold better than folk, that they sold better that month than the other wrestlers. So I want to say it was somewhere. Someone who has a history of that magazine probably knows better than me. But this was my one regret when I'm a kid. So Hulkamania, I'm in 100%. I'm like, oh, Hogan is so cool. And there's a magazine, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, that says, Hulk Hogan, he was once a bad guy. And I think I asked my mom for the magazine at the grocery store, and she's like, oh, no, we got to leave. And so I didn't get it. And then I went back, and they had already replaced it with the new month. And then I probably bought that month, and then I started buying it every month. And I had a subscription for like 3 years, I think, to Pro Wrestling Illustrated. So that magazine, when they were trying to say that Hogan was once a bad guy, like to me, who had just got into wrestling, I had no clue. Now, to people who'd been watching wrestling, who were clearly not a new fan, they knew, if they were watching, you know, uh, previously that Hogan had a career before WWF, and that was like so fascinating to me. Like, oh, there's a whole history of this stuff before
Yeah.
I even started watching. How crazy! And I just wanted to learn all of it. Like that's the way that I was with everything: baseball, football, basketball. I was like that moment that I got into it. Oh, now I need to learn about everything that happened before. So going back to this Scott Hall thing, which is so crazy because what is the Razor character known as? What is Scott Hall from the Outsiders from the NWO known as? Crazy charisma, right? Just so much charisma, oozing, bigger than life, even overshadowed his wrestling skill. And he was a pretty good wrestler for a big guy. But back then, when I was reading about the magazines, they would always talk about how he's just missing something in his personality. He's too plain. Like that was what he was known as back then. So fast forward. Now, I never even saw this, but I went and looked in YouTube. 1989, NWA, Jim Crockett Promotions. This is when, Brian Pillman's a young guy, young up and comer. Sid Vicious is a sort of a new young guy. And so is a man by the name of Scott Gator Hall.
Oh,
Now,
I don't know about that guy.
Scott Gator Hall has one YouTube video of a 30-second video package that they just sent to, they're taking it to commercial, introducing this guy, and he's chasing alligators in the swamp. Like that's literally what he was
Skinner.
doing. And it was right before, right? It would be like 2 years before Skinner came in. So he's got like really light brown hair, light brown mustache, and he didn't really have a long run in NWA at that time. So then, now this is Razor was great. If I was to be honest, I would say my favorite version of Scott Hall before the NWO Scott Hall was 1991. Dusty's creating a bunch of new characters at this time. Johnny B. Bad, PN News.
Don't say anything
Dusty's
bad about Johnny B. Bad. Don't.
no,
He was my favorite WCW character.
I was. This was when I was. There were a couple pockets of my life where I was watching like probably too much wrestling, and this was one of them. And so they do these big giant presentations, these video packages. The Diamond Stud, Scott Hall. Now, Scott Hall took all the really good things about that character, and then he used them as Razor Ramon. he had the jet black hair. He had the little piece of hair coming down here, and the Razor's Edge, which was probably the most copied pro wrestling move. If you're a little kid and you had like a little brother or some cousins,
Oh, constantly.
he did that move as the Diamond Stud, but he didn't call it the Razor's Edge. He called it the Diamond Death Drop. So for me, that version of Scott Hall, the Diamond Stud, that was my favorite version, and I never understood why it didn't work, because he had the women like Ravishing Rick Rude. He had the pants that they would tear away and they would rip them off, and then he'd be in his tights. And I thought he was like the coolest guy. Unfortunately, he leaves soon thereafter. Shows up not unfortunately, because then he becomes a giant star, but the Razor Ramon character that you know now. Do you know the origin story of Razor Ramon from a creative standpoint? Have you heard this story before?
Wasn't it that he like pitched it and Vince had no idea about Scarface? He just loved the
Yes.
concept. It's funny, because I knew that we were talking about this, so I was just trying to like figure out like my Razor memories, right?
Yeah.
I remember thinking that is Scarface. Like,
Mhm.
as a kid, I knew from my father, I'm like, oh, that dude is playing Scarface.
Yeah.
And I loved everything about it. Like, it was different. He was the first cool bad guy, that I remember seeing.
Yeah.
Like, as a kid, like I saw it and I was like, okay, this is awesome, but he's a bad guy. I shouldn't like him. But look at the shirt. He has no
Yeah.
buttons on that thing.
Maybe a little bit of inspiration for a future version of Andrew Zarian there.
Maybe a little bit, right? A little bit. Sometimes I use machismo.
Yeah, you got some.
I got to go to a
machismo going.
doctor for it, but sometimes I'm oozing machismo. It's a problem. I don't know. But that oozing machismo line was so in with all my friends. My whole school, all the guys would go up to the girl. Like, we're like kids, we're like, oh, I'm oozing machismo. We had no idea what it meant.
And the accent, right?
Clue.
Like, he did the accent. I would say, like, he didn't speak a lot because it was like short sentences and stuff. But the accent, if you're hanging out with your friends, you would do the Razor Ramon accent with your friends.
We still do it, dude. We still do it.
So,
I mean, even before all this, like all my buddies and I, we still do the whole Ayo thing,
Yeah, totally. Okay, so now I don't know if this is true. This is just what I read. Could possibly not be true. If somebody knows the story, definitely let us know. So you mentioned the Vince McMahon thing. Pat Patterson too. They thought that Scott Hall was just coming up with it on his own. Like, this guy's a genius. So Vince comes up with the name Razor. But Scott thought, I don't think I should be only Razor. Like, Razor should be the nickname. Vince just wanted to call him Razor, and that was it. So he went up to Tito and was like, okay, I need a Hispanic-sounding last name with the letter R. And then so Tito comes up with the Ramon part. So he becomes, or a first name, I guess. He becomes Razor Ramon. And then, obviously, everybody knows where he goes in 1996. The internet is a much bigger part of our lives when it comes to our wrestling fandom. So, I think the hardest of the hardcore knew that he and Kevin Nash, their contracts were coming up. And, when you see him on that one episode of WCW, it was a very cool moment. It was one of those moments where you're like, I know a lot about this stuff. I know who that guy is. I've been watching this guy forever. What are they doing here? Because this feels pretty big. And
you know what else,
do
Garrett,
you remember
also, to add on that? I just want to add on that. When that happened, right, in 96, that was the beginning of, like, people, like kids like me, a 12-year-old version of me, kind of learning, like, smartening up,
Yeah.
and I'm using hand quotes for people listening. That was the first time that we, like, from like 95 to like 97, the exposure that about like what goes on in the back, that was never a thing. I was too young to kind of understand it. I don't think 12-year-olds at that point were subscribing to the Observer that they are now. I'm willing to bet that there's a ton of fans, which is amazing to think about. There's a ton of fans going on WrestlingObserver.com to seeing what's going on. That
Oh
was
yeah.
not a thing back then. But it was the first time, like, I specifically remember reading the story about holding Vince hostage. What was it, in Ohio or Idaho, wherever they were, where they refuse, the outsider, the clique kind of
Yeah.
use their
Yeah.
politics to get what they wanted. So
Yeah.
already that buzz and that coolness existed, that these guys are not just characters, there's something more to it. And then, like you said, we'll go into it. He shows up on Nitro. That was probably one of the first times that the back and forth thing was
Oh
happening.
yeah. Oh yeah. And that kicks off then Kevin Nash coming. He was the medium-sized man, Kevin Nash was the big man, and then Hogan comes in, and it really changes. Now, the thing that I wonder if the current generation of fans, and the reason why I'm reminded of it today is because of this whole Cody Rhodes situation, and we're going to talk about Cody a little bit into the down the line on this show, but back then there was a lot of crossover, right? Vince is starting to lose a lot of his older talent, Hogan and Savage, right? Because he wants to phase those guys out. He doesn't want his company to be the old company with the old stars, Vern Gagne still beating all the talent. Like, he wants his company to be a little bit younger. Now, what he doesn't realize is the drawing power of those guys is still so heavy. So Vince getting rid of all these guys creates an opportunity for WCW to compete. They can get
Mhm.
Hogan, they can compete. And so, from that point on to 96, there's people going back and forth. Vince grabs Johnny B. Bad, right? Mark Merrow. And I think he even gives Mark Merrow a guaranteed contract, which he didn't do, except for, guys like Hogan. So that's part of the enticement. Let's bring over Johnny B. Bad. Everybody knows the Brian Pillman thing, where Brian Pillman is pitting both sides, in negotiation for his services as a professional wrestler. So it's going back and forth and back and forth. And then Hall defects, Nash defects. They're two guys who were very over with that WWE audience. And it was very quickly, too. I think you'd just seen Nash on WrestleMania, and then he was in WCW like a couple months
Gone,
later.
yeah.
But so here's the thing. The thing about Hall and Nash that you don't really understand until you become an adult yourself and you understand, how to negotiate and what you're worth. Hall and Nash had it in their contract with Eric Bischoff that every time Eric Bischoff brought in folks under Hogan's contract, I think, but above their contract, they would automatically get a raise to
Favorite
match that
nations.
contract. Right. And so when you think about that, when you think about how much power they had in as talent, um, and then you fast forward to today, and we start to see the competition again, where you have Moxley go to AEW, Jericho go to AEW. All these people who get cut by WWE, they go to AEW. Now WWE has the opportunity to pull one back, right? Cody Rhodes, and we'll talk about Raw in a second, but how this whole thing, I'm not saying it's Scott Hall didn't create wrestlers negotiating for themselves. That's not what I'm saying. But he and Nash, what they did in '96, I think is a big inspiration to kind of what is going on right now. So that's one thing that we're remembering Scott Hall for his characters and his wrestling, but that's another thing that we should remember him for is talk about betting on yourself, right? Talk about saying, look, I could be in WWE for the rest of my life, WWF. Vince will push me to a specific spot. I'll make money. I'm over with this character. All these little kids know me, but I'm going to take a shot with these other guys because they're going to pay me more money. And we have this inventive idea that I have influence in, and we're gonna see how far we go with this. So that's the other thing that I wanted to kind of just throw out there so that people remember, Scott Hall for that as well.
Yeah, I think the importance of how the business evolved and changed and created a whole new class of fans I think a lot of that, it should be talked about. Somebody sent me a message, and I found it very interesting. And he wrote, you know, that everybody talks about the what ifs, right? And certain things changing the trajectory of the business, like Scott Hall, Kevin Nash going over to WCW. That played a major impact on wrestling today. And I don't think, there are so many other, like Brett leaving, that's one. Shawn never getting hurt. These are all moments that change the industry into one direction or the other. Somebody said to me, and I found this to be interesting. He wrote, if Hogan turned heel on Warrior, his value to WCW would have never been there, and Hall and Nash most likely would have never gone over. Think about that, right? We're going from 1990, one booking decision in 1990, and I'm like, listen, obviously we don't know what could have happened. He could have still gone. He could have been anything, but that is a major thing that comes into play, right? And you're thinking, how many people are affected by one creative decision? And a lot of that creative decision had to do with Vince, deciding that the Hogan train was ending and wanted to strap it onto somebody else and being so aggressive with finding new talent in a really weird era where an abundant amount of talent, but nobody was really moving, right? And I think Scott Hall is a great example of Vince needing to create new talent because he forced himself to. There's a lot of discussion. I personally think The Undertaker is Vince's greatest character ever made, memorable. I don't think he's ever made a character from beginning to end, and that has been so successful within pro wrestling. I think there's something to be said about the Razor Ramon character, because if you talk to anybody, even disenfranchised fans, people that only watched it for a short period of time, Razor's one of the most memorable people that they bring up.
Yeah.
And I think it was it broke the mold. And I think that's the story of Scott Hall, because he broke the mold. One of the most successful acts never to hold a world title. I mean, there are reasons for that, right? Backstage reasons, personal reasons, whatever. Sure. But he's one of the most successful.
He also didn't need it. And
he also never needed
his WCW run, right? Like he was very happy to be where he was, and
you
some
shocked,
of that
though, by that.
But also
they never put the title.
Some of that was because he also had his own troubles, right? He was sabotaging his own spot in some instances.
Yeah.
And you go back and read some of those observers, like I'm reading, what I think 90. I'm in 98, and there's stuff going on with him there where they're telling him like, you can't come to this show because you're messed up and stuff. So, but the one thing you mentioned about the Razor Ramon and the Vince thing is, got to give credit to the Diamond Stud version, because they tweaked all the good stuff to make Razor, and it became very memorable.
It's amazing, even in ring, his in ring was different. The punches were different, very Rock-esque, those punches.
Yeah.
And earlier on, you asked me like one of my first memories, obviously the vignettes, but my an oh my god moment was the ladder match. Because I was in the building, I was at the Garden for that, and it was so impressive because remember, he's a big dude.
Yep.
And he just, I mean, really underrated act when you talk about the greats of that era. It's interesting to think what that new generation would have looked like without a Razor Ramon in it.
So one quote, and this is one of my favorite Twitter followers. His name is Shea Serrano, and he is he's Mexican, and he speaks a lot about being Mexican, and he says Razor Ramon was so cool that when all the Latinos found out he was actually a white guy, we were all still like, so what? We don't care, and just kept right on doing the razor's edge on each other into pools and onto mattresses. So I thought that was really funny.
I was shocked. It took me a long time to find out he was just like a military kid from Florida, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't that a story? I was shocked to hear that. Very committed to the act, man. It was an extension of himself, and I think that's really, at the end of the day, that's what gets you over.
All right, we're going to move on. I have one announcement that I want to make to the people watching and listening to this. So I've been dabbling here and there in NFTs. And I know that's kind of a bad word to some people because, oh, you know, these NFTs are just, I don't know what they are. And you only hear about these ones that the celebrities are buying for $100,000. That's not what I'm talking about. So the version of the NFTs that I really like to dabble in are called POAPs, POAP. So we have a POAP for this very show that is kind of going to kick off a series of POAPs for We're Live Pal, for Wrestling Observer Radio when I do it with Dave, and for stuff on my Fight Game Media network that kind of leads into Double or Nothing. And when we, you know, those of you who are going to join us, you know, in Las Vegas for Double or Nothing, we're going to do some stuff there with all these POAPs. Now, let me explain how you can actually get the POAP for this show. It's the We're Live Pal POAP Austin 316 week. And we'll talk about Austin here in a second as well. So how do you mint your POAP? Okay, what you're going to do, think of a POAP as like a digital baseball card, collectible, a digital Pog. You remember those little Pog things, the little circular discs? This is sort of a digital version of that. So go to your phone, go whether Google phone, iPhone, and download the POAP app. Enter your ENS or ETH address or just your email address. If you do not have a digital wallet yet, you can always get the digital wallet later. On the bottom right-hand corner of that app, you're going to see the word Mint, or I think it's a button. Click that button. Select secret word, and then type in the secret word, all capitals, Austin 316 exclamation point. Case sensitive, no spaces. Once you do that, the POAP will show up for you. I did it last night.
Very cool.
And the POAP is very cool looking. Has the We're Live Pal logo. Austin 316 is very cool. So now, why should you do this? Well, the best thing about these POAPs is that they are a proof of attendance and they may hold future value or utility. And so imagine if Andrew and I are in Las Vegas for Double or Nothing and we decide to do some sort of giveaway. We can figure out who has actually minted all of these POAPs that we have leading into Double or Nothing, and there may be a value or a gift attached to that. So that would be the reason to do so. We have 50 POAPs that are available to be minted for the We're Live Pal. And if you have any questions whatsoever, just send an email to fightgamemediapoap, POAP, at gmail.com, and you will get your question answered. So this is something we're trying, right? Like we have this show, the streaming show, also a podcast. I'm a part of a few different shows. Andrew did a POAP with Matt Men fairly recently. So we're trying to figure out this new space and how we can utilize it, but more so how we can help, how we can make something cool for people who watch and listen to us. And, you know, if you mint it with an email address, that POAP is reserved for you until you create your Ethereum address or, you know, with your digital wallet. So, but again, you have any questions about what any of this stuff is, fightgamemediapoap at gmail.com. Okay, so Austin, it is Austin 316 week. Andrew, are you going to celebrate Austin 316 tomorrow?
I'm smashing a beer on my head and I'm just pouring it all over me when I go into my office. That's my plan.
Oh, we need to put that on Instagram, though. We need to put that on the Matt Men Instagram. You just crushing a beer.
Just doing those?
Yeah.
Austin 316 week. And a lot of people assumed that he would be there. He would do something. So yesterday I watched all of Raw yesterday live for the first time in a very long time, right? Because I watched it the next day.
You deserve some credit
usual
for that, my friend.
As usual, you were left disappointed leaving. It actually wasn't a terrible Raw. It was actually a pretty good
show.
Raw.
I thought it was a good show.
Yeah, it was a good show. It was. But they have done a very good job at masking that this is a match. It's not a match. Who knows?
Yes.
Maybe it'll turn into one. We'll find out.
Yes.
It is. I've never seen them use language like this, essentially telling you that it's a match without telling you it's a match.
But if it was a match, why wouldn't they just say it's a match?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe, I mean, they want to see how Austin feels. Maybe he's
Right.
not 100% confident. Maybe there was some creative stuff. It's so bizarre to me because they do nothing WWE does is just random, right? Like one hand always knows what the other one is doing, predominantly, mostly. Social media yesterday put out a thing of a what if, WWE's Twitter. It's a
Hmm.
what if Steve Austin and Brock Lesnar had a match, right? And a couple of weeks ago, they did those. Who's the guy that you would want to face? And he said
Yeah,
Brock Lesnar.
sure.
They are doing a weird psych op at kind of putting that in the back of people's heads. I don't know. They are a little bit more aware than we think they are with disappointing their fans. That's why
Hmm.
obviously you haven't heard anything about Cody on TV, right? They haven't
Yeah.
alluded anything because maybe it's not done, maybe it is. They don't want to leave people disappointed. But the Austin thing has been baffling because they're blatantly telling you without telling you that this guy is wrestling. But again,
So
why wouldn't you book that as the match? Even if it's a 5 minute, WWE's a king of false advertising. They'll book a main event with knowing a month prior that it's not happening. That is for WrestleMania. If you advertise Austin and Kevin Owens in an unsanctioned match or any,
yeah,
whatever they want to call it, why wouldn't they do it that way? And why are they instead telling you it's the Kevin Owens show?
yeah. It's not as great of a sell for the show, right? It's not if you can guarantee Austin is going to be in a wrestling match, and that is the determination on whether you buy a ticket or not. I'm guessing you will sell more tickets by announcing it as a match. So it's got to be what you said. Maybe he hasn't signed off on it being a match yet. Maybe that is, we have, what do we have, 2 Raws until actual Mania weekend? So maybe they're holding off. Maybe Austin has a deadline to say whether or not he can actually have a
I don't
match that
know.
goes beyond 3 minutes.
But like they want to fill that building up.
Yeah,
WrestleMania is a destination show. So why wouldn't you give people, I don't know, at least 3 weeks to
yeah.
get their affairs in order and figure out what they're doing? Uh, Maybe they feel confident that they could still sell a couple thousand tickets for that night if they announce it, late enough. I
Yeah.
I'm baffled by it, and the fact that Austin in his promo, that video package that they did fantastic, great job at it, by the way.
Yeah.
He's like whatever you want to call it. You want to call it a match, you want to call it a fight, you want to call it a show, whatever you want to call it. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Like he's not saying it's not, but he
Right.
isn't saying it is.
So, no, I agree with you 100%. I'm very interested to see if he shows up because, God, you got to feel like he's got to show up at least the last Raw, the go home, right? To really hammer this thing home. I would be really disappointed if he's not on TV before then, at least one time, because the whole thing for me and Austin was if he's going to do this for WrestleMania, I want to see some promos, like talking about the greatest of all time. And Kevin Owens was amazing last
Oh,
night, getting
dude.
the stuff with the razor things in there. And look, the Kevin Owens and Seth Rollins storyline, idiotic, so stupid. The
Yeah.
idea that these guys cannot have a WrestleMania match is just ridiculously
But that's a
dumb.
new thing, right? Isn't that the new thing where you have to get your path to WrestleMania? That's what they've been saying that since January. Like this is the path
Okay,
to WrestleMania,
they
which
did
is
this with
I
John
never heard
Cena.
them do that before. Oh,
Remember,
they
like
did.
3 years
Yeah.
ago with Cena, and it
Yeah.
sucked so badly then, and it sucks now. The difference is Kevin Owens specifically, Seth Rollins to a lesser extent, but Kevin Owens is using it as his platform, his landscape to make something out of nothing because he's been doing a great job. I think the storyline sucks. These guys look like lesser than stars when their whole goal is to just interview Stone Cold Steve Austin. Oh, wow. I'm a professional wrestler. Let me interview one of the
Yeah.
all-time greats. Like, that's what I want to do. Wrestle. It's so stupid, but Kevin Owens has been making it work because he's so great. He's in a zone to me right now. So the other thing, and you mentioned as well, is the Cody situation. So there was some buzz, and I'm interested in what that. I don't. The Raw number probably came out already, but I don't imagine that there was a large swath of people who were ready to watch Raw just to see the Cody thing. I'm sure there were some. I knew people who don't regularly watch Raw who were very interested in finding out if he's going to be there. A couple of people were like, I threw Raw in the background because I wanted to see if Cody came out.
A
Now,
lot of people did.
I thought it would have been poetic. I thought it would have been perfect for him to debut last night on the day of the passing of Scott Hall, just because, Scott Hall's a bit of a game changer. They want Cody to come in. He could be a game changer. But, Scott Hall's passing was very quick, right? So you can't just rewrite the show if he wasn't going to be on anyways. If he's going to be on next week, great. If he's going to be on the go home, great. What I don't want to see happen is that he shows up on night one and is like, oh, Seth, I heard you don't have a match. Let's have a match on night two. I want to see them make him feel like a giant star. Give him a week or two to cut some promos, to build this thing up, to remind the current WWE fans why they missed out on him before, why he was in these different, Stardust and Dashing Cody Rhodes and all this stuff. So I want to see them do that only because I think it will feel like a cool moment and you can build from that. But yeah, I don't want to see all of a sudden, night two, Cody is sitting in the crowd hanging out with fans and Seth's music plays and we just have this impromptu match. I do not want to see something like that because they may think it's cool, but it's not cool, as we saw with John Cena and The Undertaker. So,
I mean, they only have you said 2 Raws, right? So next week, I don't know. I got a feeling maybe they do it next week, because they got the story that there's no road, but there may be a roads to WrestleMania.
I like that.
Dude, I'm telling you, they're going to freaking use that. They're going to turn around and
they
be like,
have to. They
he's
should.
going to come out. He goes, your road to WrestleMania has closed, the door to your road to but the roads have opened. And here comes Cody dressed, floating, because now he's a superhero, right? And beaming his red eyes like Homelander.
No, I love it.
I listen, they could do it. They still have some time. But does it, the ratings came out when we just started the show. I think they did 1.7 million.
Okay.
Did the needle move? 1.7 flat even. Did the needle move from last week?
What was the rating last week?
I don't know. I got to
know what it was.
I don't know. That's a good question. Let's go to a week ago. Let's see.
And time stands still.
Yeah, Brandon Thurston with the ratings. So I'll find it here. I'm at NXT, so I'm almost at Raw. Here we go. Monday Night Raw did 1.75 million. So they're down 75,000 viewers, but their P2 demo was up.
Mm-hmm.
That was up. I think they did a 0.45. I think they did a 0.48 today. 0.48 with 621,000. So key demo went up.
Yeah.
But the viewership went down.
That's interesting. Huh.
Overall viewership. So I don't know. I got to see the quarters. But
yeah, they were.
I mean, did the needle move? I don't know. It didn't.
It didn't. It didn't at all. At least I don't think. Very, very interesting. All right. So hopefully, like you said, we'll see something happen next week. I've been enjoying the WrestleMania build for the most part. The Ronda stuff has been fun. The Brock and Roman stuff has been fun. The the Austin stuff is intriguing. The idea of Cody is intriguing. I think Bianca Belair has been hot. Really the only thing I don't like is the Kevin Owens and Seth Rollins stuff, only because it makes them seem like they're not big stars when they are two of the biggest stars that they have. So so we'll have 2 more weeks before we get to Mania, and we'll probably do a proper WrestleMania preview on the night or the week of WrestleMania weekend. All right,
I want to get your opinion on one thing before you move on. At the end of that Bianca match, right? Becky came out, and just pummeled her. Did she tell her she's chopping her hair off the next week?
I don't know, but
she did. I believe she said, "I'm gonna I'm chopping your hair off."
Because that's part of the angle, right? Because Bianca whipped the hell out of her. That was nasty.
Somebody told me like a year ago when Bianca came up. So when was that? Like a year and a half ago?
Uh-huh.
that I, he's like, he goes, I have to tell you that people are waiting for that perfect moment to do this hot angle because that's heat. I was like, I don't know if that's a good heat though. I
She,
don't think that's the
she
heat that
should
you're going to be
she should
doing.
she should quit if they threaten to cut her hair.
I don't listen. Maybe she wants to cut it. She wants to take
Maybe she does.
that thing off
Maybe she
too
does.
because look. I can't imagine it's super easy for her to wrestle, right? And she's so good, but that thing is. Yeah, she said your hair is next week. I'm
Well, she
very
she
curious by
used
this.
it. She used it to ram her face in a chair into the steel post.
Yeah. She yanked her. I'm very curious how they do this.
Yeah, no, it's been fun. Look, they I feel they're a little bit overshadowed, right? Because Ronda and Charlotte have a little bit of a higher billing, but they're probably going to have the better match. So I think they could have one of those steal the show moments, and it'll be great for
They
them.
could,
It'll be
yeah.
great for both of them. Okay, so we'll talk a quick little segment on Dynamite here because it was the post AW Revolution restart. What did you think about some of the things that they did? You had Jericho and his team break up. FTR fires poor Tully. They tried to do a few different things, though they didn't really move on from everything because you still had Adam Cole and Adam Page. But what did you feel about some of the things that they did with AEW?
I think that they. I'm a little surprised by the ratings. Obviously, it's heavy in news. Everybody's watching the news right now to see what's going on in Europe. But for a post pay-per-view, they didn't crack 1 million, which I was a little surprised about. I think that they've set up some cool stuff. I thought the Regal thing was awesome. I'm into that. The Jericho thing is moving on, but the team name is ridiculous. I just still feel like
silly.
Hangman is still playing like third or fourth fiddle.
Yeah.
On this roster. And I don't know. Personally, I'm a huge Hangman fan. I think he's a great world champion. I love his matches. But I think we need to kind of say, is this because the other angles are so hot, or is it because his build has not been great as a world champion right now?
He had that match at the pay-per-view, and that was the first time I felt it. I was like, okay, this is the Hangman that I want to see. So I think they just have to keep doing stuff like that where he's in these grudge matches and he comes out as the tougher guy, and that's who his character becomes. Jeff Hardy shows up. I
Big
love
moment.
that music. I love that music. So I thought that was great that they got that. How did WWE let that music go, by the way?
They didn't own it.
I know, but how?
They don't have the rights.
They want to own everything.
No, so it was one of those things, like, again, going back to my, Geek Attitude Era, you would hear that theme on MTV randomly during, like, bizarre reality shows. And I would always wonder why. And I actually looked it up, like, years and years later. And the guy that, like, it's some guy that composed it. It's intended for commercials and TV. And WWE just, I guess they were using a catalog. It was on a catalog that they were using themes from. I believe the Crash Holly, the first Holly theme, Crash and Hardcore, that's on it too, and something else. I forgot what the other one was.
Wow.
But it's a pack. It's like almost like a jingle pack.
Yeah, you just sell it to these companies who need background music or something. That's a smart business, by the way. So
very smart business. I know people that do that. I know a lot of people in that field, and they make a killing. It's one of those. It's like voiceover people. It's very clicky and very difficult to get in, but once you're in, you have a job for life.
I just want to read like somebody's wrestling autobiography for Audible. Like that's what I want to do. One of those one of these days. All right. Do we have any possible? Have we been able to gather any questions or comments before we? I want to stay on the Dynamite thing, but I just want to give you a heads up in case.
So I did a very poor job at prepping these questions this week because I totally forgot that we do a Q&A this week. So why don't we do this? Why don't we open it up to the chat room and we'll curate some of the questions in the chat that we're getting because I forgot. I do have a question for you though.
Yeah.
Back to Hangman, right?
Yep.
I thought that match was great on the pay-per-view. However, the time of it really affected me because I was like 6.5 hours in to talking.
It was late, very late.
It was very late for me. Did you feel? Were you affected by going on? The show being a long show.
So I specifically avoided the buy-in. I knew
Okay.
that the pay-per-view, I was going to enjoy it much more as a 3 hour and 45 minute to 4 hour show than as a 5 hour show. Like I just know that myself, that's kind of the deal with me. So I specifically, and look, I heard the last match in the buy-in was really good. And I'm like, oh, well, it's not that I don't believe you, but I also know where my level is with how much I can sit through on a couch, and so that's why. But no, that's probably why I wasn't affected by it at all. But okay, so one more thing on Dynamite. This Wardlow storyline. Wardlow is did the long interview. He's supposed to get this match for the TNT title, and we didn't see MJF at all. And so now, just creatively, you imagine that MJF is now about to make Wardlow's life, hell. And I'm very intrigued about where they go here. Do you have any ideas on where you'd like to see this thing go?
I think you obviously that should be the pay-per-view match, right? For Wardlow. Wardlow and
Mm-hmm.
MJF should be that double or nothing match, which I'm okay with. I want to see it.
Yeah.
I like the Wardlow just squash matches. I think I always get a kick out of it. I liked it when they did it with Ryback. I know, a terrible example, but I think sometimes it does a good job at building this monster.
Yeah.
Uh, I I don't know what the end result should be here with this. Should Wardlow beat MJF and kind of get propelled into that main event picture, or should MJF just continue, being MJF and dominating?
Yeah, it's a good question. They have an opportunity to make a real star here, right? And they've been teasing this since pretty much the beginning of Dynamite, I feel like. And it's one of their longer term things that they've done. I would like to see Wardlow come out of this looking, I always compare him to, 2005 Dave Batista, right? The whole Batista
Yeah.
and Triple H scenario. That's kind of a fun way to look at it because, that made Dave Batista, like he became, a giant star from that whole thing. So I hope that they could do the same thing with Wardlow because if we go backwards now and it's him, he's got to stick with the MJF and we got to do sort of the turn again. We got to do it a second time. I'm not sure if it's going to be as impactful. I feel like it was pretty impactful at a really good pay-per-view. And now the
Yeah.
fans kind of want to see him unrestrained, I guess, and to be the baby face who overcomes. So, but they got their work cut out for them because MJF is also one of their giant stars. And I think he's over enough to where if Wardlow does have to win a match, I think Max is fine because he's always going to be able to get himself back over too. But I don't know I don't know if I have the same thing. I would say the same thing about Wardlow. Could he, if this doesn't work out for him and he takes a bit of a back step, could he come, could he come back? Maybe, but I'm just not as
Yeah.
convinced that he could as I am with Max.
Yeah. I'm curious to see where it goes. It is fascinating how big that roster is.
Oh yeah.
It blew up, and they're in a interesting moment right now with everything going on with Ring of Honor, and they're not bloated, but really large roster. Let's see where they go. I got a couple questions for you,
Cool.
so I'll curate the questions to you.
Go for it.
One, has Cody signed with WWE? I think none of us know, or maybe some of us know, but nobody's talking. Here's one. Do you think Vince is going to change if Cody does go to WWE, or are we going to see him return as Stardust? So essentially, are they going to make him a ridiculous, the same ridiculous gimmick, or will he stick to being Cody and having some sort of control?
I wonder if that's the sticking point for him signing, right? Is the creative. Because we've heard back and forth, and then I think Dave reported that, there may have been a stall in the negotiation, and is he is he is Vince, deciding now, oh, maybe he's not worth. I don't know. So what I would say is, again, and I've said this from the beginning, I don't know what's in Vince's head. I don't know how he wants to treat the situation. I don't know if he's offended because Cody, has taken shots at WWE in the past, and Vince always likes to sort of be the last man standing. But if it was up to me, I would push him 100% to the moon, so that some of those AEW talent who what we're saying is they got a large roster. Some of those folks may be feeling like they're in mid card land, and maybe when their contracts come up, they're like, I wonder if WWE is the greener grass on the other side. Thus, I would push Cody absolutely to the moon. I would not play games with him here. I would not do the Stardust thing. I would not do dashing Cody Rhodes. I would do Cody Rhodes. And friend of the F4W Wrestling Observer website here, John Muse, who longtime IATA caller from back in the day to Dave's show, he sent me an idea about bringing in Cody as an EVP with WWE, and that the storyline is that he is actually, obviously he's not going to be an EVP, but that's how he comes in. He comes in as management, which I thought was actually pretty interesting.
Wow. I'm into that. I think that's pretty cool.
I think that they would maybe not handle it so seriously as they would need to, because everyone's trying to be so creative with the writing and stuff, but it's stuff like that would force them to take it seriously. And I think they need to, because, I know people think like, look, AEW's the upstart, AEW's the underdog. WWE has been the only game in town for the longest time. I want both of them to be really good, right? Like, I don't care which is the better wrestling. Like, I want both of them to do very well. I've been watching WWF since 1985, so I want both of them to be strong. And this would be a way that if I'm thinking about this, and if I'm on the other side going like, maybe I'm not used correctly here, would WWE use me? Let's show people that you could by using Cody Rhodes the way, like a main eventer, put the title on him, whatever you want to do, but just let's make him serious and successful and over on day one.
I got a fun one here. And it's gonna lead into a what if that I want to play, right?
Okay.
Here's a question. Should Razor have won the King of the Ring in 95? And I'm gonna add this. Let's have fun with this. Should Razor have won the WWF title during that new generation? So anywhere from like 93 to 95, should Razor have won the world title?
Okay, so I wanted to make sure I knew who won the King of the Ring in 95.
Owen?
No.
Was it Owen?
It was not. Okay, so
who won 95?
Let me lay it out for you here. Okay. So Razor is in the first round.
I know what this is.
Yeah. So he gets hurt. So if we're going back to sort of being realistic, the reason why I don't think he was going to win, or if he was going to win, but he wins his first round match against Jacob Blue, but then he gets pulled out of the tournament because I guess he hurt his rib. I don't know if that was a shoot injury. I would imagine that was a shoot injury. Gets replaced by Savio Vega, who goes all the way to the semifinals
and he wasn't even in it. He wasn't even in it.
He's not in the tournament. So this is the one that is won by none other than Mabel.
King Mabel to you.
King Mabel. So
King Mabel.
Yeah, they could see, the thing is, and this is my issue with a lot of guys in WWF, which is when you become so entertaining, they feel sometimes like, oh, this person can get over without the title, so let's just have them high on the card. But we don't need to give him the title. We need to give other people a title who's more along the path that we want to go. So I think one of the things with Razor was also that he was just very likable. He was very popular. He was over. The character was great, and he wasn't in their path of what they wanted to do, because soon enough, it would go to Diesel, right? Like they were on that Diesel path right around this time. Diesel, the 7-footer, that whole thing. And he's always been, and then we can take this back to NWO, right? He's always been a really great side attraction, like the guy who's with the guy.
Supporting actor.
He's been great in that role. Now, could he have gotten the title? I remember he got when Sting beat Hogan. I think Scott Hall was like the first guy to get the title shot against Sting. That program didn't work. He was also not, not doing great. There was the match with Goldberg, right? He's the guy right before Goldberg gets Hogan. It's Scott Hall. So it was always like he was the guy before the guy. And I think that was a really good position for him because, like, not everyone could be the top guy. But, man, it was a good career for him to ultimately be just like that the guy right before the guy, and he made a great career out of it. Should he have won the world title in 93 to 95? So you're talking Bret Hart. You're talking who wins it? Bret Hart, Yokozuna, and then Bret Hart again? No, probably not. I think it sort of worked out that way. Now, you could talk me into during the time when Shawn had it and then when Diesel had it. Would there be a small, or when Bob Backlund had it, obviously, could there have been a small avenue there where he could have been the transitional champion instead of Bob Backlund? Sure. But I don't think he was going to be sort of the long-term plans of being that guy.
Fascinating era, man. Fascinating era. I got another one. I got another what if for you. A buddy of mine sent me this. He's listening. He said, ask Garrett, what does the WWF landscape look like if Razor never leaves? Right? So and I'm going to add a little bit to this. Razor's contract is up in 96, right?
Yes.
What was it? December 90? Yeah, 96, because he doesn't do WrestleMania that year. His contract's up. They re-sign him for 3 years. So 96, 97, 98, 99. This leads to Razor and WWE during that period. Does the Attitude Era boom happen?
So you're saying Razor stays, Kevin Nash leaves.
Well, let's play it out however you want to play it out, right? If one goes, does the other one also go? So Razor never gets the offer from WCW, never decides to leave. He doesn't do Japan. Vince just gives him more money.
Sure. But one of the other things was like he was just like burnt out on that schedule, right? Like that was part of the other thing is that he didn't have to work all these crazy house shows.
Tells him,
in
go
WCW.
home for 6 months. Don't worry about it. You just had the kid. Go home for 6 months and then come back.
Yeah.
Vince just becomes babyfaces everybody.
Okay, so I think you could do the NWO with Kevin Nash, Hogan, and then you would have probably had to put someone like Savage in it, right? Now, would it have been as good? Probably not, because the thing that was really cool about the Outsiders is that it seemed, at least to the viewer, they were clearly frustrated with the end of their run at WWF. So if you take the frustrated employee who has something to prove in the new company, that was definitely some of the attraction, I think. But they could have, really the key to the whole thing was turning Hogan heel, right? Like that was the key to the whole thing.
That was
these were very important pieces of it, though. I say it still happens, but it is probably not as cool. It's probably not as cool of a moment as we would have saw if it was Randy Savage instead of, unless there was somebody else that they could have had, who else was frustrated with Vince in 1996. Would it have worked with Tatanka coming over as Chris Chavis and Kevin Nash? No.
Oh man, you know what? He could have had a whole different life. I find the whole thing very interesting. Obviously, we're wrapping up here, and Razor was such a big part of like my childhood as a fan. Like, there are moments like I think about it. My mother would have her friends over on a Saturday afternoon, and I'm jumping up and down the couch screaming, "I'm a sexy boy" over and over and over again. A lot of these bizarre memories, or I'm just I'm dressed up like a sleazy drug dealer, because my father had this Hawaiian shirt I used to put on, and I used to wear like costume jewelry from my grandmother, like gold chains, and I used to do the whole razor thing. Uh, these are such amazing, fun memories of my
Oh yeah,
childhood that I would
yeah.
not have had if wrestling wasn't involved. So it just another key thing in my life that kind of created who I am today, and it's fun to say that, really.
Look, these are, as we get older, this is what happens, right? Is some of these folks are going to grow old, and it kind of sucks to see people who you just loved watching on TV pass away, and this is
You
kind of
know,
what happens with life.
Even at the end, man, this guy was still like it's sometimes you look at someone. I know we're over time here, and I'll wrap it up. But I got excited about this segment. There are times you look at a guy and you're like, "Oh man, he is not who I remember." But Razor's one of those guys that he was still, Razor. You looked at him, yeah, he looked more and more like Elvis as he got older, but
Yeah, yeah,
he was still Razor. Like, and Hogan's one of those guys too. You look at Hogan, he's a lot older now, but like he's still Hulk Hogan, and Razor was
yeah,
still Razor even later. In his early 60s, late 50s, he was still the same dude.
yeah. And and it seemed, at least with the talent as he got older, so many he knew so many people had looked up to him, and
Yeah.
so many good things that people said about him as well. And you know, not to say that he was the best person to everybody, we don't know that, but it seems like as he got older, he knew the people had looked up to him, and he definitely was cool with them. So and then that's always great to see and great to hear. All right, Matt Man, on Thursday morning,
Yes,
you
sir.
guys go early for me here. Actually, not too early for me,
Morning drive
but
time, dude.
yeah, I mean, I'm up because I have a what now 12-week old puppy, so I'm up at that time, and I'll throw you guys on. But what do you guys got? Anything special this weekend or this week?
I'm sure a lot of Razor talk. I'm gonna play a what if game at the end of the show with Razor. I just thought of that because I thought the what ifs were really interesting. Obviously, Rich and I are going to talk about that. Everything happening in pro wrestling, the Cody verse, and
Yep.
whatever else happens. I mean, it's been a crazy couple of weeks in pro wrestling news, so I'm sure there's stuff that we're going to talk about that I can't even fathom right now.
Yes. All right. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad we were able to reminisce about Scott Hall again. May he rest in peace. So for Andrew, I am Double G. See you when we see you. Peace out.